Walt Disney produced several remarkable achievements throughout his career, but one that definitely stands tall for me is Fantasia. It was an ambitious idea that grew into something unique. A brilliant combination of animation and classical music, it sought to show even more what animation was capable of, and while it was not widely regarded on original release, Fantasia has thankfully since been evaluated as a masterpiece. The original intention was just to produce the Sorcerer's Apprentice short, but when Walt and Roy Disney saw how expensive this undertaking would be, the decision was made to make it a feature film with a variety of animated segments set to classical music. The idea was to emulate the concert hall experience, with noted conductor Leopold Stokowski brought in to handle the orchestrations. Disney already had several of the best artists and animators in the world, so it was little surprise they created such spectacular images for Fantasia. The music choices also pivotal to the film's brilliance, with no two pieces sounding alike and matched to images that perfectly suited them. A few times they followed the conductor's initial intention, but Disney also allowed freedom in how to interpret the music. Of course, the most famous segment in the movie is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, set to the composition by Paul Dukas and starring Mickey Mouse. It truly is a spectacular sequence, one of the best uses of Mickey in his lengthy cartoon career as he deals with the brooms he brought to life. There are so many iconic images in this segment, the most well-known being Mickey directing the stars in the sky. People tend to think of Mickey as a goody two-shoes character, but he has his flaws too, which are nicely explored in this segment. It would have been easy for Walt Disney to have all the segments feature his famous cartoon characters, but he chose not to. He wanted to show animation could do more than funny animals. Mickey would get people into the door, but the rest of the movie would be full of experimentation and imagery, unlike anything else seen in Disney's animated productions. For the Rite of Spring segment, it was decided to make it about the beginning of Earth and the rise of the dinosaurs. Taking this ballet, making it about dinosaurs, was so inspired and resulted in some amazing images, and this segment is usually considered the high standard for dinosaurs in animation. The Nutcracker Suite segment would also allow viewers to see things they would not have before. One of the segments that always stuck with me watching Fantasia as a child were the dancing mushrooms. It was such a funny image paired perfectly with the music, and the other parts of Nutcracker were similarly filled with creative depictions of nature. I feel like the Disney artists don't get enough credit for how they depict nature, but that has always been something they've excelled in, not just in Fantasia, but in Bambi and the short film Flowers and Trees too. Connecting Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony to Greek mythology was another fantastic idea, and the animators made terrific use of characters like the drunken Bacchus, the winged Pegasus flying through Greece, and Zeus throwing down his lightning bolts. For the most comical segment, there's Dance of the Hours, featuring a ballet full of sneaky alligators and graceful ostriches, along with elephants and hippos. All these animals have so much personality as they dance their way through the columns. The most abstract imagery is paired with Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, as we're treated to the shapes and lines reacting to the music. It was bold of Disney to want to start the movie this way, but it immediately told the audience this would not be an ordinary Disney picture, and they were going to see more than just cute animals and classic storyboard characters here. The last few segments present some of the most daring animation to come out of the Walt Disney Studios. Night on Bull Mountain shows Satan himself taking joy out of unleashing his demon spirits and letting them run amok. People have this image of Disney being very family-friendly, but the studio's history is filled with movies that have dark and freaky imagery, and Night on Bull Mountain is plenty of those. However, because of the music, there's a strangely alluring and enchanting aspect to the animation. Curiously, a writer from the New York Herald Tribune had an intense negative reaction to Fantasia, making several statements about how nightmarish and brutal the movie was. However, she left the theater before this segment came on, so imagine what her reaction to that would have been had she stuck around to the end. Fantasia eventually ends with Ave Maria, a calming and beautiful way to finish the film and conclude this concert. The music and segments chosen in that order was an important part of what made Fantasia work, knowing how to ease the audience into each segment with help from Deems Taylor, a noted music critic at the time, who provided the right context. He even has a few fun interactions with the orchestra and an animated interpretation of the soundtrack. Speaking of the sound, Walt Disney saw that as another important part of the Fantasia experience. He wanted the audience to feel the music all around them and have the sound move to specific speakers during the right points. He termed this system Fantasound and invested heavily in building and installing the equipment. However, most theaters weren't able to use it, and so many viewers on original release only saw it with regular speakers. Even though Fantasound was a failure, Disney and the sound engineers were given a special Academy Award for using Fantasia to advance sound technology in motion pictures, and their contributions likely paved the way for later surround sound formats. Now multiple speakers are common in pretty much any movie theater. Walt had such high hopes for Fantasia, he planned to re-release the movie every year, but swapping out the animated segments for new ones. Unfortunately, the film was a box office failure on original release for a few reasons. The general audience thought the movie was too highbrow, the classical music critics hated the idea of the compositions being set to animation, and the Second World War resulted in the foreign market being cut off. Fantasia was just too ahead of its time, and it would take several years for the film to eventually turn a profit. Oddly enough, the most appreciative viewers ended up being college students in the late 60s and early 70s high on mushrooms. I've always loved classical music though, so Fantasia was a movie I enjoyed a lot even as a child. While it did have those moments I might have dozed off to, the images still always stuck with me, especially from the Nutcracker Suite, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and Dance of the Hours. As I grew older and continued to revisit the film, I would appreciate it more and more. And now I think it's the best movie Walt Disney ever put his name on. The film has undergone a few alterations over the years. Most infamously, a black centaur was cut out of Pastoral Symphony, having a stereotypical design common for 1940s animation, but has since been a lot more frowned upon for understandable reasons. Despite its importance in the company's history, Disney did not do a very good job of preserving Fantasia and its soundtrack. For a 1982 re-release, they had to re-record the music with Irwin Costell conducting. A few years later, they managed to restore the original recordings for the 1990 re-release. Unfortunately, some of the audio for Dean Taylor's introductions have become unsalvageable, and even though the movie is now widely available in the original Roadshow presentation, it's Corey Burns' voice you hear coming out of his mouth. Byrne tries his best, but it's also obvious you're hearing that voice you hear all over the Disney parks. Walt Disney's original plan for Fantasia never came to fruition, but discussions for a new movie restarted in the 80s, first by Wolfgang Reitman and then by Roy E. Disney. At one point, Beatles music was considered for this new Fantasia, but it was decided to remain with classical music. Also, do you know how much it costs to license Beatles songs? Finally, Michael Eisner gave his approval to start production in the 90s. Fantasia 2000 kept largely faithful to the spirit of the first movie with its use of classical orchestral pieces paired with various animated segments. And while Walt Disney wanted to push what sound technology was capable of with Fantasia, for this continuation the studio wanted to take advantage of the IMAX format. I saw the movie in IMAX in its original release, and was stunned by the presentation with the animation really popping on this massive format. At the time, IMAX was primarily used for documentaries and short films, so this was something quite new for them, and it was a breathtaking experience. It really added to the concert-like feel. Many of the segments were also expertly chosen and brought to beautiful life by the artists and animators of Walt Disney Animation. My personal favorite is Rhapsody in Blue, which is done in the style of Al Hirschfeld. There's a wonderful energy to this segment as we see various characters deal with the constant movement of New York City, and they each go through intriguing arcs. Eric Goldberg supervised this, as well as Carnival the Animals, about a flamingo plays with a yo-yo. That's a similarly delightful piece of animation which gives so much personality to that flamingo in a little under 2 minutes. Donald Duck got the chance to star in his own segment with Pomp and Circumstance, which tells the story of Noah's Ark from his and Daisy's point of view. There's so many wonderful and hilarious sight gags throughout, but it also does a lovely job of showing the two ducks' reactions as they think each has been swept up in the flood. The Steadfast Tin Soldier segment allowed Disney to adapt another Hans Christian Andersen story and experiment with computer animation. It's a solid retelling of the tale, albeit with a different ending, but it mostly amazes for its use of CGI to bring the characters to life. Like the box segment that opened the first movie, Fantasia 2000 starts with an abstract take on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, done with angular butterflies. It's a striking sequence and an excellent way to begin the movie. The ending of the film is the Firebird Suite, which is a beautiful depiction of nature and the damage it can cause to even itself. The lush greens of the forest and the fiery monstrosities of the volcano that erupts and Firebird that leaps out were amazingly done by the artist. The one segment in Fantasia 2000 I'm not too fond of is Pines of Rome. It's somewhat inspiring, they thought, to pair that piece with flying humpback whales, but the story does not do much for me, and every time I watched the film I wanted to hurry up and get to Rhapsody in Blue. Meanwhile, The Sorcerer's Apprentice is included in the film, and it's a nice way of paying tribute to Walt Disney's original plan for Fantasia, while also allowing the audience a chance to revisit its most famous segment. Rather than use one host, multiple celebrity guests were employed to introduce the segments. Some of these are well chosen and bring the required classiness, like Angela Lansbury, Ishtar Perlman, and James Earl Jones. However, we also have to sit through Steve Martin doing a comedy bit and Penn and Teller randomly showing up. Nothing against them, and these are funny performers, but they just feel out of place in Fantasia. I do love the little bit we get with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck before Pomp and Circumstance. When Mickey is looking for Donald, they even made it sound like Mickey was running around the IMAX theater. By the way, Mickey was animated in that section by Andreas Deja, who has drawn the famous mouse on multiple occasions for Disney. Overall, while Fantasia 2000 was maybe more conventional than its 1940 predecessor, it's still a delightful piece of entertainment and an amazing showcase for the artists of the Walt Disney Studios at the time. The movie did perform consistently when it played on IMAX screens for 4 months, but was largely ignored when it made its way to traditional theaters. So much like Fantasia, this new movie lost money in its original theatrical run, but I assume home video sales helped it break even. However, Disney still pressed forward to making another Fantasia movie, with new segments already being produced. Unfortunately, with the disappointing box office performance of some of Disney Animation's films in the early 2000s, and the decision to stop producing hand-drawn animation, the plug was pulled on this third film. 4 of the completed segments were eventually released as their own standalone short films: Destino, Lorenzo, The Little Match Girl, and One by One. Those first 3 were even nominated for Best Animated Short at the Oscars. I would love for Disney to give a new Fantasia movie another try one day. The closest we've gotten is the Short Circuit animated series produced for Disney+. While not exactly like Fantasia, you can definitely see the influence with that combination of music and animation. In any case, what Walt Disney and his artists accomplished with that first movie remains one of the most amazing achievements in animation history, and one does wonder what he would have done had it been successful back in 1940. Fantasia 2000 was a more than worthy continuation though, and it was a joy to see it on IMAX. Both films stand out within the Disney library while serving as terrific introductions to these unforgettable pieces of classical music. See you next time.